Before light touched the farthest reaches of the galaxy, the cosmos was a place of quiet tension, an intricate lattice of worlds teetering on the brink between order and chaos. Millennia of conflict had left scars unseen but deeply etched, a residue of war that seeped into the currents of star systems and into the hearts of those who would govern them. The Republic was young, its ideals radiant yet fragile, stretching across countless star systems like threads of a web that had never been fully tested. In this era, empires rose and fell almost as quickly as new colonies emerged, leaving behind both monuments of civilization and ruins haunted by forgotten battles. It was in this precarious balance, in the spaces between history and legend, that the seeds of Yoda's path were sown. The Jedi Order, still shaping its identity, moved quietly among the stars, guardians of a fragile peace in a galaxy that scarcely understood it. Their temples were scattered like beacons of light, shining from core worlds to distant fringes, where shadows and superstition lingered like mist over stone. The Jedi were scholars, warriors, and diplomats, yet they were not yet the symbols of omnipotent guardianship they would become. Each generation refined the teachings of the past, crafting a philosophy that sought to harmonize the will of the Force with the will of civilizations. But in this formative age, the Order was also fallible, prone to disputes, internal rivalries, and an occasional misjudgment that rippled outward, touching worlds far from Coruscant's marble halls. Amid the distant stars, planets thrived or decayed according to their own rhythms. Verdant worlds hosted civilizations brimming with life, their societies rising in vibrant harmony with the natural force, while barren systems struggled under the weight of exploitation and neglect. Trade routes were fragile, susceptible to raiders, mercenaries, and the merciless whims of nature. Storms of plasma and gravitational anomalies disrupted navigation, reminding even the most powerful civilizations of their insignificance in the vast cosmos. It was a galaxy alive with both possibility and peril, a place where a single being, attuned to the currents of the Force, could feel the tremors of events yet to unfold. In these centuries before Yoda's birth, legends whispered through the Order. Jedi Masters told stories of extraordinary warriors who had touched the balance of the Force, their triumphs and failures forming a tapestry that would inspire and warn those who came after. Some legends spoke of battles with creatures that defied reason, of ancient Sith who fell into shadow, and of moments when the Force itself seemed to rebel against the designs of mortal beings. These tales were not mere entertainment. They were ethical guides, moral exercises in understanding that every choice had consequences, often unseen and unfolding across generations. To those attuned to the Force, history was not a series of events but a living, breathing entity, shaping destinies in ways subtle and profound. In the political arenas of the Republic, senators debated and legislated, striving to maintain unity across star systems with divergent interests and cultural values. Alliances were fragile, and decisions made in distant chambers could spark uprisings or incite war on remote planets. Corruption occasionally seeped into these discussions, not as a monstrous force but as a slow erosion, unnoticed until its consequences became impossible to ignore. The Jedi, in their role as peacekeepers, were frequently called to intervene, to mediate, to steer conflicts toward resolution. Yet even they were not immune to the imperfections of the galaxy, for every diplomatic victory carried the weight of compromise, and compromise was often indistinguishable from concession. By the time Yoda would open his eyes to this vast and tumultuous galaxy, the foundations of both chaos and order had already been laid. Empires, Jedi, trade networks, and shadows of corruption had all been cast. This epoch, though distant, shaped the moral and spiritual framework that would guide him through triumph and failure alike. The galaxy, in its complexity and fragility, was both canvas and crucible. And in the silence before dawn, the currents of destiny whispered of a path that would stretch across centuries, testing the limits of wisdom, patience, and courage. In such a universe, one being's journey could echo across time, leaving a resonance that would endure long after stars burned out and empires crumbled. The stage was set. The galaxy, vast and intricate, awaited the emergence of a guardian whose life would embody both the heights and the burdens of the Force. And in the quiet, unbroken stillness before the dawn, Yoda's story began. In the quietest corners of the galaxy, where light barely touched the emerald canopies and mist clung to towering mountains, life moved with a rhythm older than the Republic itself. On an unnamed, secluded world, hidden from the gaze of most travelers, Yoda was born, a being small in stature but vast in potential. Here, the Force was not a distant philosophy or a codified discipline. It was alive in the rivers, in the wind that whispered through dense forests, in the pulses of energy that hummed beneath the soil. It flowed like a hidden current through every living thing, and from his earliest moments, Yoda moved with a sensitivity that distinguished him from all others. His eyes, bright with curiosity and perception, saw the world not only for what it was but for what it could become, sensing connections that others would never notice. This world, untouched by galactic politics and war, was a sanctuary and a crucible in equal measure. The creatures that roamed its lands were both companions and challengers, testing the limits of Yoda's innate patience and resourcefulness. Some were gentle and wise, moving in harmony with the environment, while others were fierce predators, testing his reflexes and courage. From these early encounters, Yoda learned lessons that no Jedi text could teach, that every being had a role, that power was meaningless without understanding, and that even the smallest of actions could ripple outward in unforeseen ways. The Force, he discovered, was not something to be wielded but something to be respected, to listen to, and to honor. The isolation of his homeworld offered protection, but it also meant that the young Yoda's gift remained hidden for many cycles of his people's sun. It was during one of his solitary meditations along the banks of a luminous river that wandering Jedi explorers first sensed the extraordinary resonance within him. Drawn by a force stronger than curiosity or chance, they approached with caution, reverence, and hope. These visitors were far from the grandeur of Coruscant spires, far from the endless debates of the Senate or the martial exercises of Jedi academies. They were seekers of potential, hunters of promise, and they found it embodied in this small, unassuming child who moved with a grace that seemed both deliberate and effortless. The encounter was subtle but transformative. Yoda, though untrained, understood intuitively that his life was shifting, that the currents of destiny were stirring. He did not flee, nor did he resist. Instead, he observed, learning the nuances of negotiation, empathy, and the silent communication of intention. The Jedi sensed his readiness, not in brute strength, but in harmony with the Force, in his capacity for reflection and discernment. They offered him the first glimpse of a galaxy larger than the forests, mountains, and rivers of his home. It was a galaxy vibrant with possibility, yet fraught with unseen dangers, a place where hope and darkness were locked in eternal struggle. When Yoda left his homeworld, it was not a departure marked by ceremony or fanfare. There were no celebrations, no waves of adieu from a population that might have scarcely understood the significance of what was happening. Instead, he stepped into the stars with quiet determination, carrying only the lessons of his birthplace and an innate understanding of the Force's subtle energies. Each star along the flight path became a mirror, reflecting both promise and challenge, hinting at the trials that would define him. As he traveled, the galaxy revealed itself in fragments, bustling trade hubs where morality bent to commerce, quiet colonies where life moved in ancient rhythms, and worlds scarred by the aftermath of conflicts long since ended. It was a galaxy alive with contrasts, and it would demand all of his perception and wisdom. This first journey into the wider galaxy also exposed him to the limitations of his knowledge. While he was extraordinarily attuned to life and the Force, he had not yet encountered the complexities of sentient politics, the seductive allure of power, or the deceit that could twist ambition into cruelty. Yet even in these first experiences, his moral compass remained steady. He observed the suffering of worlds torn by conflict and greed, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the stirring of a vision for what could be, a universe guided by wisdom, compassion, and balance. In these moments, he began to understand that his destiny would not be measured by the battles he fought, but by the clarity and serenity he could maintain in the face of chaos. The journey was not merely physical, it was deeply spiritual. Yoda's connection to the Force deepened with every passing world. Every encounter with life informed strange and familiar. He discovered that the galaxy's heartbeat was not uniform but varied with the histories of its inhabitants. Some currents were turbulent, others gentle, and some carried echoes of ancient pain. He learned to listen, to feel, and to discern the patterns beneath the surface, understanding that his role was not to dominate, but to perceive, to guide, and ultimately to endure. Each step forward reinforced the quiet truth that would define him for centuries. Wisdom was cultivated through experience, patience, and observation, not through force or fear. By the time Yoda's small vessel passed beyond the last shadows of his homeworld, he was no longer merely a child. He was a being poised at the threshold of destiny, carrying within him the purity of his origins and the promise of influence that would one day reshape the galaxy. The untouched forests, the wind-swept plains, and the silent rivers of his world had imprinted upon him a perspective rare even among the Jedi. He understood instinctively that true power was inseparable from responsibility, and that every act, however small, could echo across space and time. In leaving the unknown world, Yoda stepped into a galaxy fraught with wonder and peril, uncertainty and hope. His journey would not be easy. Betrayal, war, and loss awaited him, as did triumph, enlightenment, and the quiet victories that history often overlooks. Yet it was here, in the early days of exploration and understanding, that the foundations of his character were cemented. The child of an unknown world became a figure whose insight and patience would outlast empires, whose life would embody the tension between light and shadow, and whose legend would endure far beyond the stars he first glimpsed. The galaxy had whispered to him, and in response, Yoda had listened. He had stepped from obscurity into a path no one could yet measure, guided by intuition, harmony, and an unspoken understanding of the Force. This was the first step in a journey that would span centuries, a journey that would see the rise and fall of the Jedi Order, the emergence of darkness and light, and the quiet, enduring influence of one small being who would carry the weight of the galaxy's fate with wisdom beyond imagining. The path from innocence to mastery is rarely gentle, and for Yoda, it began under the watchful eyes of the Jedi Order, where the Force was not simply a gift but a responsibility that demanded discipline, humility, and unwavering focus. From the first moments of formal training, he was tested, not only in skill, but in character. Every lesson, every mission, was a crucible, designed to shape not the body alone, but the mind and spirit, forging a being capable of perceiving the currents of the Force in a galaxy fraught with conflict. Yoda's instructors quickly recognized that his potential was extraordinary, but it was not the raw strength of his connection to the Force that marked him. It was the depth of his understanding, the patience with which he observed the world, and the rare humility that allowed him to learn even from the smallest and simplest of sources. As a Padawan, Yoda faced challenges that tested the very core of his being. His training was relentless, demanding mastery over mind and body. Early exercises with lightsabers were rigorous, but they were only the surface of his trials. The true challenges lay in meditation, in the study of the Force, and in learning to sense the unseen connections that bound the galaxy together. He spent hours in contemplation, feeling the heartbeat of worlds, understanding the subtle interplay between life and energy. These were lessons that could not be rushed, lessons that required a stillness of mind and a clarity of perception that few young Jedi possessed. Yet it was in the missions beyond the training halls that Yoda's character was truly forged. Sent to remote colonies and border systems, he encountered the galaxy's complexities firsthand. Here, he witnessed the consequences of fear, greed, and ambition, and saw how easily hope could be crushed by violence or neglect. A conflict over trade routes might escalate into bloodshed, a dispute between species could spiral into lasting enmity, and a single act of betrayal could destabilize entire communities. Each experience revealed to Yoda the fragile nature of peace, the delicate balance that the Jedi were sworn to protect. He learned that courage was not only measured in combat, but in restraint, empathy, and the ability to make decisions that honored life even when the outcomes were uncertain. During these formative years, Yoda also confronted moral ambiguity. Not all threats could be eliminated by lightsabers or strategic acumen. Some required negotiation, patience, and subtle persuasion, while others demanded a painful understanding that the galaxy was often indifferent to justice. In these moments, Yoda's rare humility and insight distinguished him from his peers. He did not rush to impose his will. He did not succumb to pride or impatience. Instead, he observed, reflected, and acted with precision and clarity, learning to wield the Force not as a weapon, but as a guide, a lens through which to perceive truth and consequence. His instructors watched with growing respect, recognizing that Yoda's potential was exceptional not merely in strength, but in wisdom. Where other Padawans sought glory, he sought understanding. Where others relied on instinct, he relied on observation. And in moments when fear or anger threatened to dominate, Yoda's calm discernment proved that he could resist impulses that might corrupt a less disciplined mind. It was this balance, between power and restraint, confidence and humility, that hinted at the extraordinary role he would one day play within the galaxy and the Jedi Order itself. Despite his gifts, Yoda was not immune to struggle. There were times when failure loomed, when missions did not go as planned, and when the young Padawan had to confront the limits of his knowledge. These moments, painful as they were, became the foundations of his resilience. He learned that wisdom was born not in victory alone, but in the careful reflection upon mistakes and in the quiet contemplation of alternative paths. Every error, every misjudgment, was a teacher, a reminder that even the most attuned being could be tested and, in turn, could grow stronger through humility and persistence. Through years of rigorous study, dangerous assignments, and the observation of countless lives and societies, Yoda began to transform. He moved with a quiet assurance, a sense of purpose rooted in understanding rather than ambition. His connection to the Force deepened, allowing him to perceive subtle shifts in energy, the intentions of others, and the echoes of past actions. In these moments, he became more than a student. He became a guardian in the making, capable of navigating the unpredictable currents of a galaxy both wondrous and perilous. Perhaps most importantly, Yoda began to understand the true essence of peace. It was not merely the absence of conflict, nor the presence of order imposed by authority. Peace was a living, fragile condition, cultivated through mindfulness, patience, and an awareness of the countless interwoven strands that shaped life across the stars. He grasped that a single misstep, a moment of arrogance, or a failure to perceive the hidden currents of power could undo what generations of guardians had labored to protect. The stakes were immense, and the weight of responsibility settled upon him with quiet gravity, shaping the contours of a mind that would one day guide the Jedi through some of their darkest hours. By the time Yoda completed his early training, he had become more than a Padawan. He had evolved into a figure whose insight extended far beyond his years or size, a being whose understanding of life, morality, and the Force set him apart. His humility allowed him to learn constantly, while his courage ensured that he would act decisively when the galaxy demanded it. In every mission, every encounter, and every quiet moment of reflection, he was being prepared for a destiny that few could comprehend, a role that would define not only the fate of the Jedi but the course of the galaxy itself. In retrospect, these years of trials were the foundation of Yoda's enduring legacy. They instilled patience, cultivated wisdom, and nurtured the moral clarity that would guide him through victories and failures alike. Each test, each moral quandary, and each challenge faced in these formative years contributed to the making of a guardian whose influence would span centuries. And though the galaxy was yet unaware of his presence, the currents of destiny were already in motion, preparing a small being from a distant, unknown world to become one of the most revered figures in its history. The trials of Yoda's youth, forged in contemplation and tempered in action, were not mere preparation. They were the crucible in which a legend was born. And as he took his first steps into adulthood, the galaxy awaited, unknowingly poised to witness the rise of a master whose light would endure through darkness, whose wisdom would shape generations, and whose quiet strength would leave an indelible mark on the fate of all worlds. In the years following his ascension to Jedi Knight, Yoda emerged into a galaxy increasingly defined by complexity, division, and subtle, simmering conflict. He was no longer merely a student of the Force. He was a steward of it, tasked with bridging worlds that spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, and fought over grievances older than memory. His path was not marked by the grandeur of battle alone, but by the quiet, exacting work of diplomacy, a skill far more perilous than the clash of lightsabers. Every negotiation, every treaty, demanded not just intelligence but the ability to sense the unseen threads of the Force woven into the hearts of individuals and nations alike. And in this, Yoda excelled, moving with a calm authority that inspired confidence and trust, while masking a mind constantly calculating the consequences of each decision. Across fractured star systems, alliances were fragile and temporary, held together by a delicate balance of respect, fear, and shared interest. Conflicts could ignite over resources, trade rights, or ideological differences, and Yoda often found himself walking the narrow edge between intervention and observation. He recognized early that force alone could never create lasting peace. Persuasion, empathy, and strategic patience were equally essential. When he entered a council chamber, a diplomatic conclave, or even a remote village, his presence carried weight, not because he commanded armies, but because he understood the moral and spiritual consequences of every action. Even the smallest gesture, the slightest intonation, could tip the scales toward harmony or chaos, and he navigated these currents with unmatched subtlety. Yet Yoda's rise was not without shadows. The galaxy he sought to protect was vast, and the forces arrayed against balance were patient and cunning. Ancient grudges lingered in the hearts of leaders, criminal syndicates expanded their influence in the shadows, and the Republic itself, though radiant in ideals, was often blinded by bureaucracy and corruption. Yoda saw these dangers with clarity, but he also understood that overt confrontation could destabilize entire systems. He learned that restraint, observation, and strategic timing were as vital as any lightsaber or display of Force power. In these lessons, his reputation grew, not through spectacle, but through the quiet, unshakable wisdom he brought to every challenge. During this period, Yoda's influence expanded across the Jedi Order as well. His peers came to rely on his counsel, and younger knights sought his guidance, drawn to a presence both nurturing and disciplined. His mastery of the Force was profound, but it was the harmony of intellect, morality, and intuition that distinguished him. In moments of council deliberation, He could perceive the unspoken tensions that threatened unity, offering solutions that honored principle without sacrificing pragmatism. It was a rare gift, one that would define his role for centuries, a mediator capable of steering both Jedi and political entities toward equilibrium, even when the stakes seemed insurmountable. Even as his renown grew, Yoda never allowed pride to taint his judgment. He remained acutely aware of the fragility of peace, the impermanence of alliances, and the ever-present risk of corruption. He watched as ambitious senators and charismatic leaders rose and fell, as entire worlds shifted allegiances with the tides of commerce or fear. He understood that power alone could not secure stability. It required foresight, empathy, and the ability to anticipate the movements of both friend and foe. In this way, Yoda's rise was not marked by conquest, but by influence, the quiet shaping of events that ensured the preservation of life, the protection of justice, and the safeguarding of the Jedi Order's principles. Amid the successes, there was a persistent undercurrent of unease. Yoda could sense the galaxy's slow, creeping drift toward imbalance. The Jedi Order, though venerable and wise, was not immune to complacency. Traditions became rigid, rituals became routine, and some among his peers began to overlook the subtle signs of disruption in favor of familiar procedures. Yet Yoda, ever vigilant, continued to probe the depths of the Force, attuned to the faintest tremors of danger. Shadows lingered at the edges of his perception, ancient threats that refused to die, and he prepared, quietly and diligently, for challenges that others could not yet see. It was during these years that Yoda honed his role as a strategist, blending diplomacy with foresight. When disputes flared between rival star systems or factions within the Republic, he did not simply react. He anticipated, crafting solutions that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. He mediated conflicts that could have escalated into war, averted crises that might have destabilized the fragile Republic, and preserved lives that might otherwise have been lost. Each success reinforced his growing legend, yet he remained aware that true mastery required constant vigilance and a readiness to confront failure when it inevitably arrived. By the time Yoda had reached the height of his early career, he was recognized not merely as a Jedi Knight or Master, but as a guardian in its truest sense. He was a bridge between worlds, a keeper of balance, and a moral compass in a galaxy that often struggled to distinguish between justice and expedience. Yet beneath the surface of his achievements, the whispers of unrest persisted. The currents of the Force hinted at challenges far greater than diplomacy alone could resolve, and the shadows that gathered on distant worlds promised a reckoning that would test every lesson he had learned. In retrospect, Yoda's quiet rise was the perfect preparation for the turbulent centuries to come. He learned that influence without wisdom could crumble, that peace without vigilance could evaporate, and that even the most profound mastery of the Force could not shield one from grief or betrayal. His early years as a diplomat and strategist were not simply about forging alliances. They were about cultivating discernment, resilience, and an understanding that the galaxy's fate rested on the careful choices of those willing to act with conscience and clarity. And so, Yoda moved through this era not with the thunder of conquest, but with the steady rhythm of patience and insight. He shaped events not through force, but through understanding. He molded outcomes not through fear, but through empathy and strategic foresight. And in every success and every quiet triumph, he prepared himself for a destiny far beyond the accomplishments of the present, an enduring legacy that would echo across the stars for centuries to come. The galaxy had taken notice, yet it was only the beginning of a journey that would demand every ounce of wisdom, courage, and humility that this small but extraordinary being could muster.